The phone vibrated on the marble counter at 10:47 p.m., shattering the quiet of my evening. I was pouring a second glass of wine, the good Pinot Noir I saved for nights when Arthur worked late, when the screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. Mrs. Vance. The voice belonged to a man trying very hard to sound professional, but I heard the tension beneath. I'm Martin Torres, manager of the Excelsior Hotel downtown. I'm terribly sorry to call at this hour, but there's been an incident with your reservation. My stomach tightened. I hadn't been to the Excelsior in 5 years. Maybe longer. What kind of incident? Your credit card was declined for room 405. We need payment immediately, or I'll have to involve security. The guest is, well, he's becoming agitated. I opened my banking app with trembling fingers. There it was, a charge for $1,287.43, dated today, at 8:15 p.m. My heart hammered against my ribs. That wasn't me. Can you tell me? Actually, Mrs. Vance, your son called about an hour ago. Kevin Vance? He booked the room, and he specifically said it was for you and your guest. He used your name, and he insisted on handling the arrangements personally. The wine glass stopped halfway to my lips. Kevin had booked the room. Using my name. For my husband and another woman. What guest? My voice sounded strange. Hello. Who is in that room? The manager's hesitation lasted 3 seconds. 3 seconds too long. I can only say there's a second party in the room. Mr. Vance, your husband I assume, is registered as the primary occupant, and he authorized. I hung up. My hands shook as I pulled up my banking history. The $1,287 charge at the Excelsior matched the precise moment when a second, larger charge appeared. A $3,400 withdrawal from the company emergency line, also timed at 8:15 p.m. No explanation. No invoice number. Nothing. Arthur was cheating on me. My son had arranged it. And they had used my name to do it. My identity, my reputation, my very self, as a shield for their betrayal. For 15 years, I had sacrificed everything for these men. And this was how they repaid me. My name is Julia Margaret Vance. I'm 45 years old, and I am a ghost in my own life. 15 years ago, I was someone else. I was Julia Hartwell, a sharp-edged corporate attorney on a partnership track at Morrison & Wells. I was the lawyer other lawyers called when they needed someone who could read a contract like poetry and find the vulnerabilities in 15 minutes flat. I was building something. I was becoming someone. Then I met Arthur. He was charismatic in that particular way that charming men are. Confident without arrogance, ambitious without desperation, handsome in a way that made you forget to finish your sentences. He had a dream, Vance Logistics, a regional transportation company with government contracts. He had vision and passion and the kind of magnetism that made people want to believe in him. He had no legal foundation. No compliance framework. No way to actually build what he was dreaming about. Marry me, he said after 6 months of dating. Help me build this. And then we'll have everything together. I told him I wouldn't give up my career. He promised I wouldn't have to. I lied to myself, and I married him anyway. I spent the first 3 years of our marriage building Vance Logistics from nothing. I drafted the corporate bylaws, carefully, meticulously, with every protection I could think to hide in the language, because even then, some part of me knew what Arthur was. I secured the Federal Contracts Review Board relationship that gave us the government transportation contract that would keep us alive. I negotiated our first 5 major client agreements. I built the legal and financial architecture that held the entire company together. Then Arthur won me in the argument about starting a family. Kevin will be the legacy, he said, holding me after the doctor confirmed the pregnancy. You'll see. Motherhood will fulfill you in ways your law career never could. I stepped back from my role as general counsel. I told myself it was temporary. Just while Kevin was young. Just for a few years. 20 years later, I was still waiting to go back. Arthur hired lawyers to replace me. They weren't as good. The company limped along, profitable but unstable. And I became the woman who picked up dry cleaning, who planned dinner parties for clients Arthur wanted to impress, who listened to his complaints about his stress and his worries and his financial pressures without ever mentioning my own sacrifices. Kevin grew up watching his father succeed and his mother disappear. By age 16, he had learned the lesson perfectly. Women were ornaments. Women were support systems. Women were things you used and then forgot about. Arthur called me soft whenever I questioned his decisions. He said I didn't understand business when I pointed out that his accounting practices were sloppy. He dismissed my suggestions about company protocol with a smile and a kiss on the forehead, as if I were a well-meaning child. "Don't worry your pretty head about these things," became his refrain. "I've got it handled." I had become invisible. And I had let it happen. But invisibility, I would learn, had unexpected power. I didn't drive to the hotel that night. I couldn't. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and something inside me, some small, rational voice that had been screaming to be heard for 15 years, told me to think. Think carefully. Think strategically. Think like the attorney I used to be, before I became the wife. I paid the hotel bill from my phone instead. $1,287, gone from an account Arthur didn't even know existed. I used the debit card attached to my maiden name, the one I'd kept secret for emergencies, the one small piece of independence I'd clung to. Then I sat in the dark of my kitchen and waited. At 11:34 p.m., Arthur came home. He smelled like cologne that wasn't his and something else. Something cheaper, younger, more desperate. He walked past me without seeing me, didn't even notice I was sitting at the counter in the dark. "Julia." He checked his phone. "Are you home? I'm going to shower. Long day. Don't wait up." I said nothing. I let him climb the stairs. I let him disappear into the bathroom. And I waited until I heard the shower running before I moved. His briefcase was on the study desk, open and careless. I photographed every document inside, the financial projections, the bank statements, the mysterious invoice marked consulting services, confidential. My photographer's eye, trained by 15 years of corporate law, catalogued everything. One document made me stop. A memo, dated 6 months ago, marked urgent, do not share. A. Vance, the accounting discrepancy M. Discovered is problematic. We need to address it before the federal audit. The overcharges to Henderson Transport have been going on for 3 years. If this gets out, it's not just company fraud, it's wire fraud and tax evasion. We need a solution. The memo was unsigned, but there was a handwritten note in the margin. K, keep M quiet. She knows too much. K. Kevin. My son wasn't just complicit in covering up an affair. He was actively involved in covering up systematic theft, wire fraud, tax evasion, federal crimes. I photographed it all and then placed everything back exactly as I found it. At midnight, I called Kevin. "Mom." His voice was thick with sleep. "Is everything okay?" "I need you to come home," I said. "Right now. We need to talk." "It's midnight. Can this wait until?" "No. It can't wait. Come home, Kevin. Now." 20 minutes later, he arrived. He looked like his father, the same confident swagger, the same assumption that he could charm his way out of anything. He was wearing cologne that matched the smell on Arthur's shirt. "What's going on? Is Dad okay?" I showed him the hotel receipt. I watched his face go pale. "Mom, I can explain." "Did you book that room?" My voice was very quiet. "Yes, but using my name?" "Dad asked me to. He said it was for a sensitive business meeting and..." "Did you know about the consulting invoice for $15,000 to Melinda Torres, the junior accountant at your father's company?" Kevin's silence was an answer. "Did you know about the overcharges to Henderson Transport? 3 years of systematic theft." "Mom, you don't understand how business works." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand that you and your father are committing wire fraud. I understand that you are willing to use my name, my identity, to cover up your crimes. And I understand that I have spent 20 years raising a man who has no conscience, no integrity, and no idea who he's dealing with." Kevin stood there, mouth open, ready with explanations and justifications and the kind of hollow apologies that only work on people who've already decided to forgive you. I had not decided that. I want you to leave this house. I don't want to see you tomorrow, or the next day, or for a very long time. When your father comes downstairs, don't let him know we've spoken. Go back to your apartment. And Kevin, think very carefully about what you've done. Because I'm going to. He left. He didn't apologize. He didn't even ask what I was going to do. Some part of me had hoped for better. Some part of me had hoped he would see himself in that moment and be ashamed. That part of me died that night. I didn't sleep. I spent the rest of the night pulling files from my old office, the home office I'd maintained even after stepping away from Vance Logistics. 15 years of documents, preserved in boxes in the garage, forgotten by everyone but me. At 3 a.m., I sat at my kitchen table with 15 years of corporate bylaws, financial agreements, and board meeting minutes spread across the surface like a map of my own powerlessness. I had drafted these documents. I had written every word, every clause, every protection. I had put them in place specifically because I knew, even then, what Arthur was capable of. I had been planning my own defense without even knowing I was doing it. By 6 a.m., I had found something. The bylaws were complicated and dense, intentionally so. I had written them that way to confuse people who didn't want to read carefully. Most of Arthur's lawyers over the years had skimmed the basic frameworks and missed what was buried in Section 4, Article C. I made coffee and read it again, just to be absolutely sure. The golden share. A 1% equity stake, non-transferable, granted to me in the original corporate bylaws. It carried zero dividend value. Financially, it was worthless. I had included it as a ceremonial gesture, something to make Arthur feel like he was taking care of me while I held all the real leverage underneath. But the voting power attached to that share was absolute. The holder of the golden share could vote to remove the CEO in cases of proven, egregious ethical misconduct that materially threatened the company's government contracts or regulatory standing. I had forgotten all about it. 20 years of marriage, and I had forgotten that I'd given myself a golden parachute. Arthur had never even looked at the bylaws. Not really. He'd signed them, filed them, and ignored them for 15 years. Because he'd never imagined I would use anything against him. Because he'd never once considered that the soft, compliant wife he'd spent 15 years dismissing might actually be dangerous. By 8 a.m., Arthur was awake. He came downstairs, kissed the top of my head, and asked if I'd slept well. Not well, I said, smiling. But I feel better this morning than I have in years. He didn't see the coldness in my eyes. He was already thinking about his day, his deals, his own concerns. I was already invisible again. I spent the next 3 days building a timeline. The hotel charge to my card at 8:15 p.m. corresponded exactly with a $3,400 withdrawal from the company emergency credit line, a line that Arthur supposedly used for urgent business expenses. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. I dug deeper into the company accounts using my old credentials, which Arthur had, in his infinite arrogance, never bothered to revoke. I still had access to 15 years of financial records. What I found made my hands shake. Melinda Torres, the junior accountant, had worked at Vance Logistics for 8 months. In those 8 months, she had flagged 7 accounting discrepancies to Arthur personally. 7 problems that were growing exponentially. And with each problem she flagged, she had become closer to Arthur. Lunches at expensive restaurants. Late nights at the office. Text messages that appeared on his phone while he was asleep beside me. Then I found her bankruptcy filing online. Melinda had $47,000 in unpaid gambling debts. She was drowning. And somehow, those debts were beginning to disappear. Monthly payments of $2,500, exact and on time, from an offshore account registered to M. Torres Consulting. The pieces clicked together like a lock opening. Arthur wasn't just having an affair with Melinda. He was blackmailing her into silence about something she'd discovered. And he was paying for her cooperation with stolen company money. I pulled the Henderson transport contracts from my archives. I had negotiated those deals 15 years ago. I still remembered the terms by heart. The contract should have generated $12,000 per shipment. But the invoices in Arthur's files were showing $18,000 per shipment. For 3 years, Arthur had been overcharging clients by $6,000 per shipment. For a company with 300 shipments per year, that was nearly $2 million in systematic theft. And Melinda had found it. I created a spreadsheet. The numbers were clean and simple and absolutely damning. $1.8 million in fraudulent overcharges to client Henderson Transport over 3 years. $47,000 in offshore payments to Melinda Torres to keep her quiet. $15,000 in consulting fees that didn't exist. $3,400 plus in personal expenses run through the company emergency line. Additional falsified invoices to cover the original fraud. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance. This was federal wire fraud. This was tax evasion. This was conspiracy to commit fraud, potentially involving my own son. And it was a direct violation of the moral turpitude and financial honesty compliance clause in the federal government contract that was keeping Vance Logistics alive. If the government found out, they would rescind the contract immediately. The company would collapse. Arthur would face federal charges. He would go to prison. But first, I needed proof that didn't come from me. I needed witnesses. I needed someone to break. I played the role of the loving wife perfectly. For 4 days, I cooked Arthur's favorite meals. I asked him about his work with genuine seeming interest. I thanked Kevin, when he came back home, trying to act like nothing had happened, for being such a helpful son. I performed the part of the woman who knew nothing, suspected nothing, threatened nothing. Arthur grew more arrogant with each passing day. He stopped being careful. He left his financial projections on the home office desk where I could photograph them. He talked about the major loan that was being finalized at the annual board meeting, now less than 2 weeks away. He mentioned the government contract audit that was scheduled for the same week, seemingly unconcerned. It's just a formality, he told Kevin over dinner on Thursday. These federal audits are always clean if you keep your nose clean. And I've been very, very clean, haven't I? I watched my son laugh at his father's obvious lie. I watched them clink glasses like they were celebrating something. And I felt something calcify inside me, the last remaining piece of me that had hoped my son might be better than this. That night, I logged into my old law firm's secure server. I had kept my access even after I stepped away, maintaining my Bar Association membership just in case. Just in case had finally arrived. I drafted an anonymous email to the Federal Contracts Review Board, citing the moral turpitude and financial honesty compliance clause in Vance Logistics' government contract. I included nothing specific, just enough information to trigger an audit, and I timed it to arrive on the morning of the board meeting. Then I did something more dangerous. I reached out to Melinda Torres. Not directly. I couldn't afford to be connected to her. Instead, I created a temporary email account. I found her personal email address through a background check site. And I wrote her a message that was part threat, part salvation. Melinda, I know about the gambling debts. I know about the $47,000 in offshore payments. I know about the consulting invoices that don't exist. I know about the Henderson Transport overcharges that have been running for 3 years. The Federal Contracts Review Board is going to audit Vance Logistics at the board meeting in 9 days. They will find everything. When they do, Arthur will blame you. He will claim you initiated the fraud. He will say you were blackmailing him. He will save himself by destroying you. You have one option: come forward voluntarily. Confess to what you found. Explain what Arthur asked you to do. Turn state's evidence. Yes, you will face charges. But you will face them as someone who cooperated with federal investigators, not as someone who was caught red-handed committing ongoing fraud. If you're smart, and I think you are, you'll contact a criminal defense attorney today. You'll tell them everything. And you'll prepare yourself for what's coming. The choice is yours. But you need to make it now. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. Then I waited. Melinda broke in 72 hours. She contacted the board secretary on Monday morning, asking for an emergency meeting before the official board session. She brought a lawyer with her, a criminal defense attorney who was clearly being paid by someone other than Melinda herself. Probably a legal aid grant. She confessed to finding the accounting discrepancies. She confessed to Arthur asking her to stay quiet. She confessed to the offshore payments. She confessed to everything. And then she gave them the ledger. It was a complete, verifiable record of every fraudulent transaction, every false invoice, every offshore payment. 3 years of meticulous documentation, maintained by a junior accountant who was too smart not to keep records of her own involvement, just in case she needed leverage. But the ledger contained something else. Something that made my breath catch when I read the forwarded copy that the board secretary accidentally, or intentionally, sent to the wrong email address, which happened to be my old law firm server. There were text message screenshots between Arthur and Kevin. Kevin wasn't just helping Arthur cover up the affair. He was actively helping Arthur manipulate the overcharge invoices. He was initialing the false documents. He was approving payments to Melinda. My son wasn't a passive accomplice. He was an active, willing participant in federal fraud. I saved every document. I created backup files. I prepared myself for what came next. The morning of the annual board meeting, I left my house at 5 a.m. I didn't leave a note. I didn't tell Arthur where I was going. I simply put on a navy suit I hadn't worn in 15 years, gathered my briefcase, and drove into the city. I had booked a beautiful apartment downtown the night before. Nothing permanent, just a 2-bedroom rental with a view of the harbor and the independence that came with closed doors and my own locks. I sat in that empty apartment with my laptop and made 3 calls. The first was to Mr. Douglas, my mentor from Morrison & Wells. He had tried to convince me not to leave the firm when I married Arthur. He had watched me disappear into marriage and motherhood with disappointment he never quite hid. When I called, his voice cracked. "Julia? My God, where have you been?" "I need a lawyer," I said. "The best one at the firm. Someone who specializes in corporate fraud and SEC violations. I need them at the board meeting for Vance Logistics at 10 a.m. And I need them to understand that they're representing me, not anyone else." "Tell me what's happened," he said. I told him everything. The second call was to the Federal Contracts Review Board. I didn't hide behind anonymity this time. I gave them my name, my contact information, and a timeline of every fraudulent transaction, supported by documents and spreadsheets that I emailed from my secure account. "I'm the company's former general counsel," I told the board representative. "I drafted the bylaws that are being violated. I have all the original agreements. And I have the golden share certificate proving I still hold voting authority over the CEO's position in cases of ethical misconduct. I will be at this board meeting, and I will present everything you need to rescind the government contract." "Mrs. Vance," the representative said slowly, "are you aware that you're implicating your own son?" "I'm aware," I said. "I've been aware for 8 days." The third call was to Melinda Torres. "I know who you are," she said immediately when she heard my voice. "I know this came from you." "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Yes, you do. The anonymous email? That was perfect. That was exactly the push I needed. And the files I gave to the board? There's going to be a separate investigation into whether you accessed company records illegally. There's going to be a lot of anger directed at you." "I'm prepared for that," I said. "Are you prepared for Arthur to go to prison? For your son to go to prison? Are you prepared to destroy your entire family?" I thought about the hotel bill. I thought about my name being used to cover an affair. I thought about Kevin laughing at his father's obvious lies. I thought about 15 years of invisibility and sacrifice and the kind of powerlessness that had become so normal I'd almost forgotten what power felt like. "Yes," I said. "I am." The boardroom at Vance Logistics was on the 23rd floor of the Westmore building. I had helped choose this office building 15 years ago. I had negotiated the lease. I had designed the conference room layout myself. I walked in at 9:55 a.m. wearing my navy suit and the kind of certainty that comes from knowing you've spent 15 years preparing for a single moment. Arthur was in the middle of his presentation, projecting financial forecasts on the screen, describing the remarkable opportunity of a $15 million strategic loan that would be finalized at this very meeting. He didn't see me enter. None of them did until the door opened wider and two people walked in. Mr. Douglas from my old firm, and the Federal Contracts Review Board representative, a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Chen with steel-gray eyes and a leather briefcase. Arthur's presentation cut off mid-sentence. The board members turned in their chairs. And Arthur's face went absolutely white. "Julia? What are you doing here? Get out. Right now. This is a confidential meeting." "Actually, Arthur," I said, and my voice was perfectly calm, "I'm the holder of the 1% golden share. I have every right to be here." I placed the certificate on the table in front of him. I had framed it 15 years ago and forgotten it existed. Now it looked like a death sentence. "I need to present evidence of egregious ethical misconduct," I continued, "that materially violates the moral turpitude and financial honesty compliance clause of our federal government contract." I played the slideshow. Every fraudulent invoice. Every offshore payment. Every false document. I explained the 3-year history of overcharging Henderson Transport. I showed the text message exchanges between Arthur and Kevin. I showed the evidence of blackmail and coercion against Melinda Torres. And then I let Dr. Chen speak. "Vance Logistics government contract is suspended effective immediately," she said, not unkindly. "There will be a federal investigation into wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Mr. Arthur Vance and Mr. Kevin Vance are persons of interest in this investigation. The company is frozen pending the outcome of the audit. That is all." She left. The board members sat in stunned silence. Arthur had gone from confident and smiling to absolutely gray. "You did this," he whispered. "You did this to me." "I didn't do anything to you," I said. "You did this to yourself. I just made sure everyone found out about it." I placed the second document on the table, a formal motion, prepared by Mr. Douglas and notarized that morning. As the holder of the 1% golden share, and in accordance with Section 4, Article C of the Corporate Bylaws, I move for the immediate removal of Arthur Vance as CEO, based on proven egregious ethical misconduct and material violation of the compliance clauses governing our federal contract. The board lawyer, a woman named Patricia who had served for 5 years, looked at the bylaws in her hands. She looked at the certificate. She looked at the mountain of evidence I'd provided. "The motion is valid," she said quietly. "The golden share carries absolute voting power in cases of proven misconduct. There's no further board approval needed. Mr. Vance is removed from his position as CEO, effective immediately." Arthur stood up. His chair fell backward behind him. "You can't do this. I built this company." "You built it," I said, "using the legal framework I created, using the government contract I negotiated, using the money I helped you structure. You didn't build this company, Arthur. You just lived off what I built and then lied about it." He looked at me for the first time in 15 years like I was real. Like I was someone. And I could see the exact moment he understood. The soft wife he'd spent 15 years dismissing had just destroyed him without even raising her voice. The next 72 hours were a blur of legal proceedings, federal investigators, and police that came to arrest both Arthur and Kevin at their homes. Arthur's lawyer told him to take a plea deal. Kevin's lawyer told him the same thing. Both refused, thinking somehow they could charm their way out of it. Both were wrong. The press had a field day. Local CEO faces federal fraud charges. Wife holds the smoking gun, the headline screamed. Some reporters tried to paint me as a villain who had known about the fraud all along and done nothing. Others called me a hero who'd taken down a criminal conspiracy. I didn't read any of it. What I did read was the email from Henderson Transport, the client Arthur had defrauded for 3 years. They wanted to talk to me about restitution. They wanted me to help them understand what had happened and why. They wanted to know if Vance Logistics could survive to make things right. I told them I would see what I could do. The board met in emergency session and voted unanimously to appoint me as interim CEO. It was a strange, beautiful irony. I was coming back to the company I'd never really left, stepping into the role I'd trained for my entire adult life, in order to clean up the destruction of the man I'd spent 15 years building up. I discovered things in those first weeks that I'd been too close to see. I discovered that there were 5 other employees who'd known about the fraud and said nothing. I discovered that the company had been skating on the edge of bankruptcy for 2 years, held up only by Arthur's increasingly reckless financial maneuvering. I discovered that there were also 12 other employees who were brilliant and brave and had been waiting their entire careers for someone like me to give them permission to do their jobs properly. I restructured the company from the ground up. I built a new compliance system. I renegotiated with Henderson Transport and arranged a payment plan that would take 3 years but would eventually make them whole. I met with the government contract office and convinced them to give Vance Logistics a probationary period to prove that the fraud had been an individual failure, not a systemic one. It was the hardest work I'd ever done. It was also the best. 4 months after Arthur's arrest, I was offered a permanent position as CEO of Vance Logistics. The board wanted to vote on it formally. They wanted to make it official. I accepted. As part of my new contract, I negotiated to keep the golden share. Not as an emergency weapon anymore, but as a permanent part of my compensation. 1% equity, 0 dividend value, absolute voting authority over the CEO position. I had it framed and hung it in my new office, right where I could see it every morning. On the wall next to the certificate, I also hung a photograph. It was a picture of Julia Hartwell, taken 20 years ago, back when I was an associate at Morrison & Wells. I was standing in front of the firm's building, wearing a power suit and holding a briefcase and looking like I owned the world. I had been that woman once. I had given her up. And I had finally gotten her back. But I was different now. I was stronger. I was angrier in a way that burned clean instead of consuming me. I was smarter because I understood the cost of underestimating people. I was kinder because I had learned what powerlessness felt like, and I never wanted anyone to feel that way again. 6 months after the board meeting, I received a letter from the federal prison where Arthur was awaiting trial. I almost threw it away. But something made me open it. Julia, I don't expect you to answer this. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just need you to understand something. I spent 15 years believing that I was the smart one. That you were soft. That you didn't understand business. That you were just a wife, someone to have dinner ready and to look beautiful at company events and to fade into the background so I could shine. But you weren't fading into the background. You were building. You were preparing. You were leaving yourself escape routes and safety nets and ultimately, a way to destroy me without ever having to raise your voice. The worst part isn't prison. The worst part is understanding that you were always smarter than me. You always knew what I was capable of. You always had a contingency plan. And you were right to. You were so right to. I want you to know that I know what I lost. I had a wife who was brilliant and loyal and who sacrificed everything for me. I had a company that could have been the greatest thing either of us ever built, if I had just been smart enough to let you help me. I had a son who could have been a decent person if I taught him that women deserve more than dismissal and disrespect. I threw it all away because I was too arrogant to recognize power when it was standing right next to me. I understand now. I understand too late. But I understand. Arthur. I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, filed away with all the other evidence of my past that I refused to forget. I didn't write back. There was nothing left to say to Arthur Vance that would matter anymore. 1 year after the board meeting, I stood in the downtown apartment that had become my home. Not temporary anymore, but permanent. I had furnished it with care, filled it with books and art and music that I had chosen. There were no compromises in this space. There was no one else's opinion to defer to or work around. The apartment's windows looked out over the harbor, where sailboats moved across the water like they were writing poetry in motion. I had a glass of wine, the good Pinot Noir, not the cheap stuff Arthur used to buy in bulk, and I was reading a brief that one of my junior associates had prepared. The associate was a woman named Sarah. She was brilliant and ambitious and fiercely dedicated to her work. And she was raising 2 kids on a single income while maintaining a 95% success rate in contract negotiations. I had hired her personally and told her that she could work flexible hours. I had told her that she didn't have to choose between being a good mother and a good lawyer. No one had ever told me that. I had made the choice myself, and I had chosen wrong. I was determined that no one under my authority would ever face that same ultimatum. The divorce from Arthur was finalized 2 months ago. I didn't ask for much, just enough to live on comfortably and the equity I'd earned over 15 years of building a company. Arthur's lawyer fought for every penny. I let him. Every penny was proof that my sacrifice had been real and valuable and worth fighting for. Kevin had plea bargained his charges down to a single count of wire fraud in exchange for cooperation against his father. He was facing 2 years in minimum security prison. He had written me letters apologizing. I had not answered any of them. I wasn't ready to forgive my son for the casual way he had betrayed me. Maybe I never would be. My mother called once a week. She had been appalled when I first told her what I was doing. She had been raised in a generation that taught women to keep their marriages together no matter what. But when I finally saw her face to face, she looked at me across the restaurant table and said something that surprised me. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I spent my whole life doing exactly what your father wanted because I didn't think I had a choice. But you did have a choice. And you made it." "I waited 15 years to make that choice," I said. "But you made it," she repeated. "And you made it correctly." The Federal Contracts Review Board officially reinstated Vance Logistics' government contract 2 months ago, with commendations for how thoroughly I had cleaned up the compliance violations and restructured the company's accounting systems. Henderson Transport sent me a photograph at the reinstatement ceremony. It was of their CEO, holding a check representing the final payment of restitution. He was smiling. He had tears in his eyes. The caption read, "Justice served with integrity." I kept that photograph in my office next to the Golden Share certificate. The media continued to sensationalize the story for a while. The betrayed wife, the criminal husband, the son who chose the wrong side. But eventually, it became old news. Other scandals took over the headlines. People moved on. I didn't move on. I moved forward. I hired Mr. Douglas as a consultant for the company's legal department. He worked 3 days a week and loved every moment of it. He told me that watching me rebuild what I had created was the most satisfying thing he'd witnessed in his entire career. "You were always going to be extraordinary," he said. "I just never imagined you'd have to go to war to prove it." The company grew. Slowly at first, then steadily. Within 18 months of my taking over as CEO, Vance Logistics had expanded into 3 new territories and brought in 4 new corporate clients. We were profitable. We were stable. We were built on a foundation of honesty and compliance and the kind of meticulous attention to detail that had almost been destroyed. I promoted Sarah to VP of Contracts. I hired 2 more women as senior associates. I created a mentorship program specifically for women in logistics and supply chain management. I used my position not just to rebuild a company, but to remake an entire corporate culture. Every time I looked at the Golden Share, I remembered the moment I found it in the bylaws. I remembered the moment I realized that I had given myself power without even knowing I was doing it. I remembered the moment I chose to use it. That was the real victory. Not the money. Not the title. Not even Arthur's conviction and imprisonment. The real victory was understanding that I had always had the power. I just had to stop waiting for someone else's permission to use it. On the 1-year anniversary of the board meeting, I gave a speech to the Vance Logistics employees gathered in the company auditorium. "I want to tell you about something I learned this year," I said, looking out at the faces of people who depended on me to lead them properly. "I learned that invisibility is not the same as powerlessness. I learned that sacrifice is not the same as obligation. And I learned that sometimes the person who is underestimated the most is the one who holds all the cards." I paused and looked directly at the camera that was live streaming this to our satellite offices. I spent 15 years building this company while being told that I was too soft to understand business. I was told that my ideas were naive. That my concerns about compliance were overwrought. That I should focus on being a good wife and mother instead of having opinions about corporate strategy. And here's what I want to say to anyone listening who has ever been told that they're too soft, too weak, too emotional, too much like they don't belong in the room. You belong. Your ideas matter. Your instincts are valid. And if the people around you can't see your value, that says nothing about you. It says everything about them. The man who led this company before me was brilliant at one thing, making people believe in his lies. But he couldn't recognize truth when it was standing right next to him. He couldn't see that the person he was dismissing was actually the foundation he was built on. He thought he was the predator. He didn't realize he was the prey. So I'm standing here to tell all of you, especially the women in this room, especially the people who have been told they're not quite good enough or smart enough or tough enough, your value is not determined by the people who dismiss you. Your power is not diminished by their inability to see it. Find your golden share. Find the thing they forgot to take from you. And don't be afraid to use it. The room erupted. People stood up. I could see tears on faces, especially the women's faces. And I realized that this moment, this speech, this transformation of a personal victory into a larger lesson, this was what truly mattered. It wasn't about destroying Arthur or Kevin. It was about showing other people that they didn't have to wait for permission to be powerful. 6 months later, Vance Logistics was nominated for Best Place for Women to Work in Logistics by a national trade publication. We won. In my acceptance speech, I held up the Golden Share Certificate. This represents 1% of the company's equity and 0 dividend value, I explained to the audience of logistics professionals. But it represents 100% of the voting power needed to change everything. This certificate was given to me as what I thought was a consolation prize. Arthur Vance believed it was worthless. He was wrong. I'm establishing the Golden Share Foundation today, I announced, and I saw the cameras light up with interest. This foundation will provide legal representation and financial support to women in business who find themselves in unequal partnerships, marriages, business relationships, or family situations where their contributions are being minimized or exploited. The foundation will help them understand their rights and their power. Because here's what I learned, there is no such thing as a woman with no power. There is only a woman who hasn't found her leverage yet. The foundation took off faster than I expected. By the end of the year, we had helped 47 women understand their legal rights and take control of their situations. Some divorced. Some renegotiated their business partnerships. Some simply walked away knowing that they had other options. One of them was Melinda Torres. I received an email from her 18 months after the board meeting. She had completed her prison sentence and was starting fresh in another city. She had gone back to school and was training to become a forensic accountant. Someone whose entire job would be finding fraud. Julia, I wanted to thank you. I know I was part of what Arthur did. I know I made choices I wasn't proud of. But I also know that I didn't have to live in that situation forever. Because of what you did, because you showed me what it looked like to take your power back, I had the courage to take mine. I won't ask for your forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that what you did rippled further than just your own life. You changed me. Thank you for that. Melinda. I printed the email and kept it in the same drawer with Arthur's letter. Both of them, my ex-husband and the woman who had been his accomplice, represented the same thing to me, the possibility of transformation. The possibility of choosing differently. 3 years after the board meeting, I received a visitor at Vance Logistics headquarters. It was Kevin. He had been released from prison 2 weeks prior. He looked older than a man of 25 should look. He looked like someone who had spent 2 years understanding exactly what he had lost. I don't expect anything from you, he said before I could even offer him a seat. I just wanted to see if you would talk to me, even just for 5 minutes. I looked at my son, the child I had raised, the person I had loved unconditionally, the man who had betrayed me, and I tried to find anger. But what I found instead was sadness. And underneath the sadness was something else. Something that might, eventually, become forgiveness. Sit down, I said. For the next hour, Kevin told me about prison. He told me about the exact moment he understood what he had done, not to his father but to me. He told me about the rehabilitation classes he had taken, the therapy he had pursued, the work he had done to understand how he had become someone capable of that kind of casual betrayal. I think I always knew I was treating you wrong, he said. But I didn't care because Dad didn't care. And he was the person I wanted to be. So I stopped seeing you as someone worth respecting and started seeing you the way he did, as background decoration. And now? I asked. Now I see you as the woman who built an empire and then took it back single-handedly. Now I see you as the strongest person I know. And I'm ashamed of every moment I wasted being too blind to see that. Shame doesn't fix anything, I said. I know. But understanding does. And I'm trying to understand now. I'm working as a junior accountant at a mid-sized firm, a legitimate job, a legitimate company. I'm earning my way back to being someone who deserves respect. And if you ever want to talk to me again, I'll be waiting. He left before I could respond. Which was good, because I didn't know what to say. I wasn't ready to forgive Kevin. But I was no longer angry at him. And that felt like the beginning of something. On the 5th anniversary of the board meeting, I attended my 20th college reunion. I wore a dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe had cost 15 years ago. I wore confidence like a second skin. And I walked into the ballroom knowing exactly who I was and exactly what I had done. My old roommate Sarah, a different Sarah from my VP Sarah, came running up to me. Julia. Oh my God, I've been following your career. You're incredible. CEO of Vance Logistics, founder of the Golden Share Foundation, mentor to dozens of women. How did you do it? I smiled. Because I had asked myself that question 1,000 times, and I finally had an answer. I remembered that I was smart, I said simply. And then I stayed smart when it mattered most. Later that evening, I excused myself from the party and stepped out onto the hotel balcony. The city spread out below me, lit up and alive and full of possibility. I thought about Julia Hartwell, the woman I had been 20 years ago. I thought about the woman I had been forced to become, the invisible wife, the unpaid home manager, the emotional support system for men who took me for granted. And I thought about the woman I had finally chosen to be again. The Golden Share wasn't just a clause in a corporate document. It was a philosophy. It was the understanding that power doesn't come from being seen or appreciated or valued by other people. Power comes from understanding your own worth and refusing to let anyone convince you otherwise. I had given my power away. And then I had taken it back. And now I was going to spend the rest of my life making sure that other women understood they had the same capacity to do exactly that. My phone buzzed. It was an email notification from the Golden Share Foundation. Another woman had applied for our legal assistance program. Her story was different. She was in a business partnership rather than a marriage, but the core was the same. She had been made invisible. She had been underestimated. She had been told that her ideas and her contributions didn't matter. I opened a new message and began typing her response. Dear Sarah, welcome to the Golden Share Foundation. Your situation is more common than you might think. But what you have is something unique. You're finally asking questions instead of accepting dismissal. That's the moment everything changes. Let's talk about your options. As I typed, I looked at the photograph on my phone. The one of Julia Hartwell standing in front of Morrison and Wells, 20 years younger, holding a briefcase and looking like she owned the world. I owned it now. Not the building. But the power. The clarity. The understanding that I had always been the one in control, even when I thought I wasn't. The Golden Share had saved my company. But it had also saved me. And that, I thought, was worth everything. If you've made it this far, you understand, respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by my husband calling me too soft, or my son using my name for a cheap affair. My story proves that silence can be a weapon, and patience, the years I spent drafting those corporate bylaws, can be absolute power. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's been gaslit into invisibility. Tell them, your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. My 1% share wasn't worthless, it was the Golden Share that secured my freedom. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. They thought I was just the wife. I became the only person with the power to dismiss the CEO. Share your story below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.